morning. Welcome to September 18th, day 2 of ComFish Alaska 2020. We are coming to you virtually this year. I am Sarah Phillips, the host of ComFish 2020 with the Kodiak Chamber of Commerce, which is the host of ComFish 2020. How many times can I say it in the morning, right? So this morning we've got a really great lineup for you. We are starting off with Tom Koloski with the Alaska Unified Command update. He's going to give us a ton of really helpful, insightful information about all the mandates that have been related to COVID and everything else that our commercial fishing community should be aware of as far as what has happened and what's to come. We also have an update from the Officer of the Governor with John Mueller, as well as the State of Alaska Fish and Game report from Commissioner of Fish and Game, Doug Vincent Lang. We also are going to have afternoon sessions starting at 2 o'clock. We're going to have the representative update from Louise Stutz' office with Louise Stutz and Senator Gary Stevens. We're also going to be having a pre-recorded session at 2:45 from Ted Tuskey, a comprehensive look at non-fatal injuries and illnesses among Alaska fishermen. And then we're going to end off our day with a comprehensive forum about boat batteries. So be sure to tune in. We've got all sorts of really great information for you today. We're excited to be kicking off the morning, offering everything that we can to all of you. Again, ComFish 2020 is not possible without the help from our sponsors, Hot 101.1 and KVOK here in Kodiak, Alaska Aerospace Corporation, the Best Western Kodiak Inn right here in Kodiak, Alaska, and Alaska Airlines. Please help support us by supporting our sponsors. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our first presenter of the morning, Tom Koloski. Tom Koloski is an emergency management specialist for the State of Alaska Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. He is currently assigned to the Alaska COVID-19 Unified Command as the Director of the Critical Infrastructure Sustainment Branch. Born in Kodiak and raised in Juneau, Tom is a retired U.S. Marine who now lives with his family in Anchorage. So please join me in welcoming Tom, and we look forward to this presentation.
All right, thank you, ma'am. I really appreciate that introduction, and we greatly appreciate the opportunity to present here today. Let me go ahead and share my screen so we can get started. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As Ms. Phillips mentioned, my name is Tom Koloski. I'm an emergency manager for the state of Alaska. I'm currently with the Alaska COVID-19 Unified Command. What I'm going to be discussing this morning is a little bit about how the Unified Command is organized and how we operate. And then I'm going to be focusing on the state health mandates that affect the seafood, the commercial fisheries industry, both the harvesting and the seafood processing. We're going to go through each of these mandates, talk about what they are in their current form and some potential changes we're going to be seeing in the near future. We're going to then talk a little bit about some of the changes and lessons learned we've had over the summer, and then a little bit on what we can expect looking ahead into 2021. If you have any questions as we go through there, please go ahead and put your comments in the chat or send them to Ms. Phillips and her staff. She'll provide those to me to answer towards the end of our session here. First off, I want to talk about the Unified Command. We realized very quickly once we began responding to the COVID-19 pandemic that no one department within the state had the resources or the capability to handle the full response needed. So we formed what's called a Unified Command, and that is basically with representatives from 3 different departments: Department of Health and Social Services, Department of Military and Veteran Affairs, which our Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management falls under, and the Department of Public Safety. These 3 departments operate as co-equals in order to coordinate the Alaska state response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We also do a lot of communication and coordination with our other departments here in the Alaska government. We make sure, because we're dealing with critical infrastructure, we're working with Department of Commerce, Department of Transportation on a regular basis, because a lot of this comes back to worker safety. We work with Department of Labor and Workforce Development. And as we deal specific with the issues that affect our commercial fisheries, we make sure we're in communication with Alaska Department of Fish and Game and the Commercial Fisheries Entry Commission. So within the Unified Command, we have 3 incident commanders that are all basically co-chairs, one representative from each of the three primary departments. Down under the operations section, these are basically where a lot of the work gets done, where the rubber meets the road. We're organized in several different branches. We have our medical services branch, which is all the doctors and nurses who are working on the medical related response to this pandemic, establishing alternate care sites, doing the contact tracing, making sure that our medical materials and resources are distributed properly across the state. We have our our disaster assistance branch, which is helping a lot of our municipalities and our communities with disbursement of disaster related funds. We have an emergency services branch, which is handling a lot of the non-medical response to this pandemic, whether that's sheltering and feeding, or just handling all of the non-COVID related disasters we have throughout the state at any given time, from flooding to wildfires to winter sea storms. And we also have the critical infrastructure sustainment branch. That's my team. We were formed specifically for this COVID-19 response. And we're tasked with ensuring that our critical infrastructure maintains continues to be operational to provide those essential services across the state, but we're also operating the safest possible manner. So we have to strike that balance between the continuity of operations, but also at the same time ensuring the safety of our critical infrastructure workforce and the communities that they're operating in. So one of the primary means that we have here at the Unified Command to do that is through the Alaska state health mandates. All of these mandates are developed by subject matter experts within the state government. They're approved by our chief medical officer within the state, Dr. Ann Zink, the commissioner for the Department of Health and Social Services, Commissioner Adam Crum. They're vetted through the Department of Law, and they're signed by the governor under his authorities, emergency authorities under the public health emergency for the COVID-19 pandemic. We've had a number of different mandates. We still have 5 of them that are currently in effect. We're going to talk about 3 of them in detail today, because those are the 3 which mainly impact the commercial fisheries. We're also going to talk about some of the other appendices and other documents related to the mandates. And for anybody who's looking to get the actual text of these documents, this covid19.alaska.gov, this website, I'll be referring to it a number of times this morning. That's where we can get all the information and the appendices. If you click on that website, covid19.alaska.gov, it will take you, this is the primary website, this banner across the top, health mandates. Once you click on there, when you scroll down, all of the mandates are listed in chronological order with the appendices under each mandate. So we'll be coming back to this page a few times this morning. The first thing we need to talk about is the Essential Services and Critical Infrastructure Workforce Order. That is our list here within the state of Alaska of what we feel are the true critical infrastructure, those services, those businesses which must continue regardless of the situation. Those are our essential services like water, power, communications, but also our businesses that are critical to sustain both life and economy here in the state. And because the fisheries is very, very important, both from a food safety perspective, but also from an economic driver here in the state, we made sure that commercial fishing and subsistence fishing were included as critical infrastructure services within this order. And so this is what ensures that our fishermen and our seafood processor workers can move throughout the state in order to get in place in order to properly conduct the fisheries this year and during this pandemic. So let's talk a little bit about Health Mandate 18. And we're going to go through these a little bit out of order, but there's a reason for that. Health Mandate 18 is the mandate which affects our in-state travel. This is the travel in between Alaskan communities, in between Alaskan ports. And since we originally started this early in the year, it's gone through a number of different revisions as we've slowly reopened the state through our phased Reopen Alaska Responsibly plan. As it's currently listed right now, Health Mandate 18 states that travel within the road system and the Alaska Marine Highway system is permitted in under all conditions. Going off the road system or to communities that are not on the Alaska Marine Highway system, travel is permitted, but the local communities may enact some specific local travel restrictions. Okay, and we've caveated that with the fact that for our critical infrastructure workers or for people who are conducting business for a critical personal need, the local communities can put restrictions in place, but they cannot prevent people from traveling or require people to do, our critical infrastructure workers that are arriving to the community to do a second quarantine if they've already done their entry quarantine here to the state. So they can't keep people out, but they can put additional restrictions specifically for our critical infrastructure workers on what you can and can't do once you're there in the community. Things like wearing of masks, respecting certain hours in high traffic areas such as the AC store or the post office. So it is incumbent upon anyone who's traveling to a remote community to understand what the local emergency ordinances are that they have to follow within that community. One of the other things that Health Mandate 18 put in place is that any business that has people traveling between Alaskan communities off the road system, they're traveling to and from a remote community, they must submit what we call a community workforce protective plan. And there's been a lot of discussion about these plans over the summer. Down here at the bottom of the screen, this covid19.alaska.gov. If you click on the banner for Unified Command, there's a link to get instructions for how to develop and submit one of those protective plans. And those plans all come into my branch for us to review to ensure that they meet the minimum requirements for those plans. So again, Mandate 18 is in-state travel. There's a few things here that affect our fisheries, but the primary ones we want to talk about are Health Mandates 10 and 17. So we're going to talk about Health Mandate 10, the primary mandate itself. This is the one that restricts or controls international and interstate travel. Somebody who's arriving from outside the state to Alaska, or if they're Alaska residents, they're returning from more than 24-hour period outside of the state. Again, this one has gone through a number of different iterations over the summer as we've had some lessons learned, as we've had additional capabilities, specifically our testing technologies have come online. We've been able to change and modify this mandate to make sure it's as safe as possible. Right now, as Health Mandate 10 stands, every traveler returning to the state from outside of Alaska must complete a traveler declaration form online. I'll show the instructions for that in just a moment. For critical infrastructure businesses, anyone who is moving staff back to the state, we have people arriving to the state specifically to work for a critical infrastructure business, they must submit a community workforce protective plan to the state of Alaska. And they also must make sure that as they're traveling, that employee has a letter that identifies them as an employee of that business, that they are traveling as a critical infrastructure worker, and it lists the important parts of the business's protective plan specifically for quarantine and testing for that worker to arrive on it. Now, I want to clarify something on that. Again, we've gone through several different iterations of Health Mandate 10. There's requirements in there for arrival testing for Alaska residents who are returning to the state, or for people that are arriving to the state for recreational purposes. For critical infrastructure, it's a little bit different. The critical infrastructure workers must follow the plan that their employer has submitted to the state of Alaska for testing and quarantine. For a lot of our critical infrastructure, they're still sticking with a full 14-day quarantine because that's the safest method that we have at the moment. But for some of our critical infrastructure, they've decided they're going to shorten or modify that quarantine using bracketed testing. So a critical infrastructure worker who's arriving may not be required to test immediately upon arrival, depending on what protective measures their employer has put in place. We'll talk a little bit about seafood processing workers in just a moment, but so that there has been some confusion on this. A critical infrastructure worker needs to follow the plan that their employer has put in place for quarantine and testing, vice doing a pre-travel test as required for other travel under Health Mandate 10. We'll talk a little bit more about testing as we go through some of the requirements for our processing workers and our vessel crew members. So that's the primary document for Health Mandate 10. As I said, everyone arriving must do a traveler declaration form online. If you go to our website at covid19.alaska.gov, this is the main page of the website. The very top, this orange banner, there's a link here for the traveler information page. If you click on that link, it will take you to this page, which is the Safe Travels page for our COVID website. It lists all the information. If you scroll down this page, it will list the requirements for returning residents, non-residents that are arriving for non-essential travel. Some of the things, it'll have information in the format for the letters for critical infrastructure travel, but it also has at the top of the page this orange link here. This is for takes you to the travel portal in order to complete your traveler declaration form online. If you click that, it takes it to this site at alaska.covidsecureapp.com. This is the state's official travel portal to do those travel declaration forms. Every person traveling will have to come here and either sign up to, if it's their first time traveling this year, will have to sign up to have an account, or they can, if they're traveling multiple times throughout the year, they can log back into their existing account and complete multiple declaration forms under the same account. Now, there's been some question in the past on whether or not that specifically for vessels, if we can do this in, say, a batch system where we can try and submit all of the forms at once. We're really not set up to do that because part of this form is the traveler has to attest that they understand and are following the requirements of Health Mandate 10 or the requirements of their employer's Community Workforce Protected Plan. So every traveler has to do this individually and make that acknowledgement. So that was the primary of Health Mandate 10 that applies to everyone traveling here within the state of Alaska. Let's talk very specifically about seafood processing workers. This is folks who are traveling to Alaska to work in a seafood processing plant, whether that's a shore-based or an at-sea processor. You know, we've had a lot of very difficult lessons learned over the summer, looking at the outbreaks that we've had in a number of different facilities across the state. The overwhelming majority of them have been in seafood processing facilities, and that's in no way because of the action that the companies are taking. All these seafood processing companies are doing everything they can to try and keep the virus out of their facilities and keep their workers safe. What it really is that as we look at these different industries, it's the environment that the seafood processing workers have to work in, elbow to elbow on the processing line for long shifts at a time. Those are just the environment that this virus really thrives in. Living 2 to 3 in a room in the bunkhouse. Again, that is the conditions that this bug really likes, and that's why we're seeing these continued outbreaks within our processing facilities. So we learned very quickly that we were going to have to put some additional travel restrictions, some additional guidance for seafood processing workers in order to try and do as much as we can to keep the virus out of the plants. So we initially released this appendix in early May. What it has in there, it's gone through a couple iterations. We're right now working on a major change to this. What it has in its current form is it requires tests and quarantine for all seafood processing workers arriving to the state. It gives different options for how they do their quarantine, whether they're going to do it before arriving to the state and travel through chartered air, or board a vessel, and that vessel is going to be a secure, safe transit coming up to the state, whether they're going to stop in Anchorage or Juneau or another hub and conduct a quarantine there before going by a charter flight out to their final destination, or if they're going to fly all the way through to their final destination and conduct their quarantine on site in the bunkhouse at the facility. There's different options and different restrictions for each. One of the things we also allowed with the first version of this appendix was we gave some different safety measures to put in place so that people that were arriving to quarantine on site were able to get to work while they're still within their first 14-day quarantine period. As I said, we've had some hard lessons learned on this. We've still had a number of outbreaks within seafood processing facilities, and looking on how that came about, we're seeing a number of things. We're seeing that despite our best efforts to keep the virus out of some of our what we call closed campus facilities, where the facility is in a remote location, there's really no mixing with the local community. We're finding that initial time when people arrive to the facility to conduct their entry quarantine is a very critical time when we need to make sure that we're doing some additional safety measures in there. We're also finding for our facilities that have local hires and have people who are commuting back and forth and living with their family on a day-to-day basis. It is very, very difficult to try and keep the virus out of the community if there is any sort of spread in that keep the virus out of the facility if there is any spread in that local community. So we're really trying to look at ways that beyond the entry, quarantine, and testing, how do we identify an outbreak as soon as possible and try and take immediate actions before it's able to spread throughout the facility. One of the other things we've seen with a lot of our response over the summer is that those first steps, those first few hours, that first day, taking some very decisive, immediate action to separate people until we can get some testing done, until they can be assessed by a healthcare professional, really to err on the side of caution will really help hopefully mitigate and contain that outbreak before it's able to spread through the rest of the workforce. So we've been working for about the last 6 weeks very closely with our seafood processing companies to try and come up with some additional safety measures we can put in place to, number one, try and identify these outbreaks early, and number two, to take immediate steps once we've identified an outbreak to keep it from spreading. We've got some changes to the appendix that are in the final stage of being finalized and reviewed by the Department of Law. We're hopefully going to have this up to the governor's office for consideration, and we're hoping to see that this get approved and published sometime here before the end of the month. Some of the things that are going to be in those changes. Again, we're looking, how do we identify outbreaks as early as possible? What do we do once we identify one? We're going to be implementing what we call continuous screening testing. That's after workers have already come into the state, they've already done their entry tests and quarantine. We're just going to have regular checkups throughout the season and continual testing on a regular basis to try and identify to see if the virus is able to make it into the facility. We've got some better guidance on some immediate actions that employers have to take when they find a positive case within their workplace. Unfortunately, one of the things that we found with our response over the summer is that some of the CDC guidance that's in place for critical infrastructure workers allows very critical workers in low density positions to work after they've been exposed to potentially been exposed to a active case or a known case. We're finding while that may work for some other industries that can maintain their social distancing, like an electrician or a forklift operator, that's really not, it's very, very risky to do that for our seafood processing workers. So we're going to take some much more restrictive steps immediately to try and isolate our positive cases and quarantine our close contacts until we're sure that they've done some testing to ensure that they're virus free. Again, one of the other things we found in some of our closed campuses is those first quarantine period, those first 2 weeks after people arrive from out of state is a very critical time. We've realized that it's a little bit too risky to allow those people to be doing any sort of work during that time. So we're no longer going to be allowing a working quarantine for processing workers because they just can't maintain social distancing. So again, these changes are under the final stages of development. We're hoping to have this approved and out sometime this month. And those, I'm sorry, just to clarify, Appendix 1 to Health Mandate 10 applies to seafood processing workers, anyone who's coming in to work at a shore-based facility, or vessels that process more than 5,000 pounds of product per day. So let's talk about Mandate 17. So when we initially started controlling the travel here into the state, we put the requirement in for all businesses that have people arriving to the state to submit community workforce protective plans. We realized very quickly that was probably not going to be realistic or possible to have every vessel out there develop and submit their own plan. And really it wasn't, we really didn't have to do that because almost all vessels are going to be in the same, looking at the same type of conditions. So what we did is we worked with the fishing industry and we developed a community workforce protective plan that can apply to independent vessels, and we implemented that and published it as Health Mandate 17. Appendix 1 is the Community Workforce Protection Plan specifically for vessels. Appendix 2 is the acknowledgement form, and Appendix 3 is a Community Workforce Protected Plan that applies to all other independent harvesters like set netters or people that are commuting back and forth on the vessel each day. So again, Appendix 1 is for independent commercial fishing vessels. It is intended to apply for people and crews that are living aboard the vessel for days while they're out harvesting. So, and it also, there is allowances within Health Mandate 17 if a fleet or a fishing association has already done a fleet plan. The vessel can go ahead and the vessel captain can say that he or she is adhering to the requirements of the fleet plan that they work under. So what's in Appendix 1 to Health Mandate 17 currently? It requires all crew members arriving to the state to do some form of quarantine. Now, there are allowances in there for protective measures or safety measures under which those arriving crew members can work during their quarantine if they need to prep the boat to get it ready, or they can actually set sail and go out and start fishing while they're still in their quarantine period, provided they follow the protective measures that are in the appendix. It also has some pretty tight restrictions on what a crew can do after they're finished. The entire crew has finished their entry quarantine period. And it has a number of different measures, some recommended measures for kind of mitigating spread of the virus on board the vessel. So that's what's currently out there as Appendix 1 to Health Mandate 17. Because of our lessons learned over the summer, we're going to be looking to implement some changes here in the near future. We're going to be looking at trying to get these changes done hopefully before the end of October. But what it's going to include, some of the changes that are going to be in there. The initial mandate, the initial Appendix 1 to Health Mandate 17 kind of predated our expansion of our testing capability here within the state. So at the time it was released, the only tool we really had was the 14-day quarantine period. We're going to be revising that. If testing is not available where the crew is going to be coming from or where they're going to be working, there's still an option. There will still be an option to do a full 14-day quarantine period, but we're really going to be focused on trying to do the bracketed testing, 2 tests either immediately prior to travel or upon arrival, followed by a second test 7 to 10 days later. We'll talk a little bit more about bracketed testing here in a moment, but we really want to try and incorporate testing to allow us for shortening and making that quarantine period more effective for our arriving crew members. One of the other things we're going to be doing is really looking at those protective measures after the entire crew is through their entry quarantine and testing period. We're going to be relaxing those protective measures where possible, meaning it's really going to default to the local emergency ordinances, what they allow their vessel crews to do once they're in port. And we also want to make sure that we're giving, again, some better guidance for the immediate actions for having, for what do you do when you have somebody who comes down with symptoms or has a positive test if they're on board the vessel. Some of the things we're finding is that for a lot of our people that get infected with COVID-19 and actually contract the disease, their symptoms may be relatively light. It may be something that they can stay active and they can fish through, but there's always a chance that someone is going to develop some severe respiratory issues over this. If they have an underlying medical condition or if they just get a really bad case of it. So we want to make sure that vessel captains are aware of that and they have a contingency plan to get somebody to medical assistance as soon as possible if they're trying to stay out and fish, if they've got somebody who's positive on board. But again, we're going to give some better guidance to vessel captains and crews. What do we do if we have a positive case? Again, we're going to be working on these changes to Health Mandate 17, hopefully to get these vetted and approved sometime before the end of October. Appendix 2 to Health Mandate 17. This is what a lot of you are familiar with this year. This is the acknowledgement form. And this was what we put in place once we released Health Mandate 17 to try and ensure that all crew members and captains were aware of it and that they were following this on board their vessels and at their set net sites. Now, what I foresee happening with this is that we are still going to have some form of acknowledgement moving forward. what we're going to be looking at is there a way for us to do this better? The hard copy forms, showing them to the tender or the processor before selling your catch. That was the best solution we come up with at the time when we released Health Mandate 17. We're trying to find a way. Is there a more efficient way that we can do this acknowledgement again to ensure that our vessel captains, to ensure that our SetNet site managers are aware and they are affirming that they're going to abide by the restrictions with Health Mandate 17. Going to try and find a more efficient way of doing this form moving forward. And Appendix 3 to Health Mandate 17, this was our Community Workforce Protection Plan specifically for our independent harvesters. This is what applies to our set netters, anyone who is living on shore and going out to fish every day on their vessel, to pull pots or whatever. This is for basically all the rest of our harvesters that don't fall up under Appendix 1. And this was released a little bit after Appendix 1. So there are some, there is some language in there in the current form about testing. Again, it predates our expansion of testing capability here in the state. So it was very much that testing was highly recommended but not required in the current form. This also gave some very specific options for a mid-travel quarantine if somebody's going to quarantine in Anchorage or Juneau or Fairbanks before moving out to their SetNet site, or if they were actually going to go all the way through to their final destination and quarantine there at the site in camp. It gave us some safety measures for a working quarantine and some of the measures that we recommend be followed at the site in order to mitigate the transfer of the disease between different folks at a SetNet site. We're going to be working again to do some updates to this, basically to incorporate some of the same lessons learned that we'll be doing for the vessels, looking again at using that bracketed testing as our primary means of shortening and making sure our quarantine period is effective. What we're also going to do here is ensure that after someone, a set netter is through their travel and quarantine period, that they're really following the local ordinances that have been put in place as far as what they can and can't do out of the SetNet site, what they can and can't do going into the community. So we're going to really leave this up to the local community leaders to set the post-quarantine restrictions for their area. And again, trying to make sure that we give that guidance for the immediate decisive action if you have a positive case at the SetNet site. So we don't really have a timeline for the changes to Appendix 3 to Health Mandate 17. We may be working on all of 17 all at once, in addition to some other updates that I'm going to talk about here in a moment. But those are the changes that we're looking for all three of the active mandates here, or excuse me, the two active mandates, Appendix 1 to Health Mandate 10 and the appendices to Health Mandate 17 here in the near future. We're looking to have all of these changes implemented before we get into the 2021 fishing season. So let's talk a little bit about some of the lessons learned and the recent changes that we've had over the summer. As I've mentioned a couple times here, when we first started regulating travel into the state, the only tool that we really had at the time to ensure that people who were arriving were as virus-free as we could ensure was a full 14-day quarantine, the entire incubation period of the virus, to try and ensure somebody was kept separated from other people for that entire time. Now that we've had a very massive expansion of our test capability here within the state of Alaska, testing has become much more available and prevalent throughout the rest of the country. We've realized that we can now start modifying and improving that quarantine period using testing. And the best method right now that we have is two bracketed tests about 7 to 10 days apart. That is a first test either right before travel, right before you get on the plane, which will hopefully ensure that people who are not potentially infectious do get on a plane and possibly expose other people. And then doing minimized interaction until you can take another test. And the reason why we really need the two tests is just the way the virus functions. Each test is a snapshot in time. It's trying to determine whether or not you have a viral load in your body at that moment. Let's say if you're traveling up from another location, you're exposed while you're en route. When you arrive and do an arrival test, it's not really going to show you're not going to have enough of the virus built up in your system for that arrival test to be positive. So we really need to have that period of minimized interaction where you're staying separated from other people until you can get a second test. And we know that second test, if you've maintained that separation, we know that second test is going to be much more accurate. At that point, 2 tests separated by 7 to 10 days, you're as reasonably safe as we can ensure you're ready to go to full operations. Now, when we say minimize interaction, that's very important. It's not a full quarantine, but this is where you're being very, very careful about who you're potentially exposing or who you're exposing yourself to. Again, we don't want someone to be within that bracketed period, get exposed to the virus, and now that second test is no longer as effective or as accurate as we would like. So during this minimized interaction period, you can be out doing things on your own or with the other people that you're quarantining with. You're not going to public areas. You're not going to restaurants or grocery stores. You're being very careful about who you get exposed to. But again, it's trying to ensure that we're having the most effective quarantine period without having to wait the full 14 days. So that's really what you're going to see as kind of the standard for arrival travel into the state until some of our other vaccination and testing options become much more prevalent, is this bracketed testing. We're going to be updating a lot of our mandates to require or encourage that across all of our industries, including the fishing industry. But for now, until we can ensure that testing is available, for our critical infrastructure folks, there will always be that second option of doing a full 14-day quarantine. So talking a little bit more about testing, and we're going to talk about some resources here. The standard test that everybody is fairly familiar with for COVID-19 is called a polymerase chain reaction, or a PCR test. It's where they insert the swab. That swab gets sent off to a lab, and you'll get results in a day or two. There's other testing technologies that are now coming available. There's rapid testing machines where they can swab it and they can test them right there on site, and that machine will be able to have results within about an hour. Unfortunately, those machines really don't do it in bulk. I mean, you can do maybe 4 tests at a time or 16 tests at a time, depending on the size of the machine. But we're really recommending to our clinics across the state that we reserve the use of our rapid testing for diagnostic testing. If somebody comes into the clinic, they're showing symptoms of the virus, we really need to know as soon as possible whether that person has the virus or not. For our entry testing and our screening testing, we're looking more for the collection and being sent off to a lab. One of the other things that is now becoming much more prevalent is home collection kits, where you can have the kit at home. You're swabbing yourself based on the instructions. You're mailing that off to a lab that's down in the lower 48, and you're getting results within a few days. Now, that's also something that we're really looking to leverage that capability at our more remote sites or on board vessels. You can have it on board the vessel. As you're coming into port, go ahead and collect that swab, mail it off once you touch the dock. And then almost all of these companies, all these labs have some sort of electronic means for you to get your results back. There's also a lot of discussion about antigen testing. That is a different type of test, different from the PCR test, that may have some really game-changing capabilities in the future. Right now, these tests, the specificity of the test is really not quite there. So they're not as reliable as we need them to be specifically for diagnostic testing. So right now, the state of Alaska is working with the Center for Disease Control to determine what's the safest places where we can use antigen testing to take advantage of that technology. And we'll be releasing that more in the future. This website here, we'll look at in just a second. This is where you can get other information about testing. If you go to our covid19.alaska.gov, this is the primary website. If you click on this banner for DHSS, that's the Department of Health and Social Services, it'll take you to this website. If you scroll down, this is about a third of the way down the page. If you click on this icon that's got the Q-tip and the test tube about testing, it'll take you to DHSS's testing site. This has a lot of information, answers a lot of questions about testing, who should get testing, when and where you can get tested. If you scroll down this page about a third of the way down, there's this testing site locator. It is a map where you can put your location in there. As you see, I basically plugged in my location at work on board JBear, and it popped up the testing facilities that are available in Anchorage. If you click on each of these, it can actually give you the hours of operation and a contact number. Also on this page, right below the testing site locator, is this list. These are all the different home collection kits that are available right now. So you can have the kit at home, send it off, and get your results that way. This is constantly being updated. There's 7 of them that are available right now that have been authorized by the FDA under the emergency use authorization for testing for COVID-19. 2 of these just got added this week. So we're constantly keeping this updated as more testing becomes available. So let's look ahead. As we wrap up, I'm going to be talking about some of the issues that we're looking ahead at and we're working on. Number 1, all of our state health mandates, as I said, were done under the emergency authorities of the governor under the public health emergency. Right now, that emergency continues through 15 November. As we get closer to the expiration of the public health emergency, obviously our state leadership is going to be considering looking at the conditions across the state at the time and deciding if that needs to be extended. What we're trying to do is look at the different protective measures that we have in place right now and see what of these need to be enduring beyond the public health emergency. What of these protective measures need to be part of our new normal? There's some of these things that are now going to be part of the daily life and the way we conduct the fisheries, such as masks and social distancing. We're trying to see how we make those protective measures be an enduring thing beyond just the state mandates. One of the other things that we're working very, very hard at the Unified Command right now is planning for the eventual distribution of the vaccine. Once something is approved and is available, we are going to have a plan for how we implement that and distribute it across the state. And that's the long term. That's going to be the real game changer that kind of gets this virus back in the box of just being another nuisance like the influenza or the common cold, vice the main driving force on most of our lives right now. That's going to take time. We know that we're hoping to have something that we can start distributing before the end of this year. It's going to take time for our collective immunity to start making that effective so that we can get back to our new normal. That's going to be the long-term fix. In the midterm, we're looking at other testing technologies that will help us over the next, until that collective immunity starts to take hold. As I mentioned, some of the antigen testing, they're getting much more reliable and much more available. We're actually at the point now they've got Q-tips where you can lick the Q-tip, rub it on a card, and it will tell you right there on the site. That card will tell you whether it's positive or negative within a few minutes. It's almost like a home pregnancy test. As things like that become more and more available, as they become more reliable and we're available, that we can get them out, we can get them on the vessels, we can get them into the remote communities and remote processing plants. We're really hopeful that that's going to allow us to start gradually looking at these different safety measures and start rolling them back as our testing is more available to try and identify who isn't infected. So again, we're going to be constantly reassessing these mandates and the protective measures, and we're going to be adjusting them as we can, as the situation develops here in the state and as the testing becomes available, the technology becomes available. We're also going to be looking at some of these lessons learned that we've implemented first with the fisheries industry, because we're trying to do everything we can to keep the virus out of your facilities. We're going to be looking at revising our instructions for the community workforce protection plans to implement some of these across all of our different communities. Our bracketed testing, our immediate actions, we want to make sure that those become a part of these protective plans. So we're going to be working on that here before the end of the year. So with that, the last 2 things I want to mention. If you have questions, I'm gonna see if we got a few moments to get anything that was in the chat. If you have questions, you can direct them to myself. We also have Jason Wired, who has also been assigned to the critical infrastructure branch. Many of you may know Jason from his long career as a fisherman here in the state of Alaska, or some of you may know him from his more recent duties as a food safety inspector for the Department of Environmental Conservation. Some of you may still be pissed at Jason for the last inspection that he gave your facility. So get a hold of Jason or myself. We also do have two recurring meetings between the Unified Command and the fisheries industry each week. We've got one that goes Mondays, which is run by the Unified Command with invitations out to the fishing industry. And on Wednesdays, we have the AFISH committee, which is made up of a number of different fisheries industries or fisheries companies. They hold their weekly meeting every other Wednesday, and they invite us from the Unified Command to come coordinate and brief at that and present at those meetings. With that, ma'am, do we have time for any questions? I certainly don't want to impact Mr. Muller's or Commissioner Vincent Lang's time.
I appreciate that. We have gotten one question. We have about 2 minutes to wrap everything up, so we'll pose it and just give it your short, sweet answer best you can. So we know that the health mandates for the seafood industry are under review, and there are some potential restrictions being considered for the shore-based processors and catcher processor fleet. What data is being utilized in order to potentially impose further restrictions?
Yes, ma'am. And that's it's a very good question. It's something that we've taken a hard look at here. Again, over about the past 6 weeks, we've been developing our changes to Appendix 1 to Health Mandate 10. And a lot of this is coming out of our lessons learned from the contact tracing with the outbreaks we have. Right now, we're up to, I don't have the updated list, but the last list I saw was about 18 different outbreaks within processing communities, processing facilities, whether that's shore-based or vessel. With each of those, our section of epidemiology has done contact tracing and kind of analysis. How did it get into the facility? If we can tell what safety precautions the facility was following. We've also been working with those facilities that haven't had outbreaks. Say, okay, what are you doing? What are your best practices that we can try and share? So that's really what we're relying on, is the data that's been collected during our contact tracing following these outbreaks in the facilities. And really what we're seeing is that, you know, we're doing a very good job with identifying folks who are in their entry quarantine. We need to do a better job for those facilities that are not closed campuses, trying to identify any positive individuals as soon as possible and keep it from spreading throughout the workforce. So
fantastic. Thank you so much for all you've offered us today, Tom. We really appreciate it. That's really going to wrap up our session for today. So I'd like to remind everyone to please reach out to Tom with any additional questions that you may have. And we are going to go ahead and transition over to updates. The update from the Office of the Governor of State of Alaska Fish and Game. And so we are admitting them into the presentation right now. Bear with us just a moment as we get this transition going. I'd like to remind everyone that if you have any comments for our presenters, comments or questions for our presenters today, please be sure to go ahead and, if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, just make a comment on the video that you're watching. Super sweet and simple. Our staff is able to relay that information to myself, and I can then relay that to our presenters. If you are watching on our website, comfishak.com, please go ahead and give our office a call. The number is 907-486-5557, and we are able to get those questions to our presenters. Again, we have about a 30-second to 1 minute lag time from what we're actually recording to what's being put out there on the website. So please bear in mind that we will have a slight delay in questions. If for some reason we miss your question, please go ahead and submit it anyway. We are going to send those off to the presenters for answers at a later date. It looks like we are all set here. I know that I can see that we've had Mr. Doug Vincent Lang join us, so thank you. I see your video, and I see that we have Mr. Mueller in the presentation too. I'm not sure who we're starting with. Are we looking for presentation update first from Mr. Vincent Lang or Mr. Mueller?
Sarah, this is John Mueller. I'd appreciate going first, and I think I'm going to keep my comments very brief, and then kind of hopefully leave enough time here for some Q&A. So if that's okay with the commissioner, I would propose that.
All right, fantastic. So Mr. John Mueller currently serves as a policy advisor to Governor Dunleavy. His portfolio includes commercial fishing, Alaska Native and rural affairs. John was born in Unalaska and is Aleut. He served nearly 6 years as a senior rural affairs advisor under Governor Sean Parnell. John is a Juneau commercial fisherman with experience providing executive leadership and public policy advice for businesses, local governments, and nonprofits. He spent 5 years serving as a member of the advisory panel for the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council and 12 years as general manager of the CDQ Group. He lives in Juneau and is married with 4 children and 1 grandson. With that, I will go ahead and let you take over, Mr. Mueller.
Thank you for that nice, kind introduction, Sarah. I'm going to keep my comments brief, as I mentioned before. As many of you know, you've been tracking this with the governor. The governor's on dealing with COVID-19 has been foremost on his mind. The continued management of the virus as things progress, as technologies improve, is a moving target, as we all know, as Mr. Kowalski presentation alluded to. There's been a number of discussions, ongoing discussions relative to mandates that affect our industry. I've been involved in many, if not most of those discussions, from representation from the governor's office, and also bringing my experience in the commercial fishing industry to the group to help them more fully understand the nuances of and the complexities of each of our different fisheries across the state. So, you know, as the governor's mentioned, he's got a serious focus on making sure that the state of Alaska is able to handle the best of its ability, the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think our case count in our state, which is amongst the lowest in the nation, speaks for management of. It isn't to say that every tragedy and those that have been getting sick is not serious, but the shutdown of our state to build up our medical facilities, I think other states are looking at that as a good move on our part here. So we continue, again, that's the foremost of our mind. I don't know if any of you have seen the governor's recent op-ed. It was co-authored by a number of coastal community mayors. Just to hit some high points on that, he commended the fishing industry, fishermen, processors, communities, local leaders, and healthcare workers, amongst others, for their tireless hours that they put into making sure that we can hold fisheries across the state. And as you may recall, early on, we had a significant push from local leaders and others to literally shut down fisheries. Well, you know, with everybody involved, we managed to pull off. Bristol Bay is a prime example. I think Kodiak's another, but we managed to have some real success stories. There's been a few outbreaks of which we're managing and adjusting accordingly. But again, I mean, there was a huge outcry to actually shut down fisheries, and thankfully we were able to navigate this real difficult time, probably one of the most, if not the most difficult seasons that we've ever experienced in the state of Alaska. So again, we will continue to focus on that. I will continue to be involved with Health and Social Services in Unified Command as we modify or adjust and tweak mandates, and you know, to address the moving target that we have in this virus. There's been a fair amount of discussion in the governor's office, and personally, my communication with commercial fishermen and associations across the state relative to the Alaska CARES Act and other relief that is out there or forthcoming relative to the commercial fishing sector. That's ongoing dialogue that's happening. We have, unfortunately, We have a number of disaster declarations, and I think from communities and associations that have come into the governor's office. And those are in the pipeline being analyzed to make sure that they meet minimum statute requirements to be qualified as a disaster. So we have, so far, I've got 8 on my desk, and we've got the Department of Commerce and Commissioner Lang's department gathering data on these disaster declaration requests of the governor. So those are in the process. And I'm going to close and lastly with we're starting our discussions and deliberations internally on budget discussions. That's a work in progress. We won't have any details for you today, or at least I won't, relative to the governor's budget that he'll be rolling out by December 15th. So those are some highlights, I guess, of what I'd like to mention. And I guess we can probably wait till comments after Doug Vincent Lang, and maybe we can field them together. So those are my comments. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. That will bring us on to Commissioner Doug Vincent Lang, who spent his 34-year public service career at the Alaska Department of Fish and Game before accepting the position of commissioner in January 2019. A scientist with a focus on fulfilling the department's mission, Vincent Lang began work on the department as a fisheries research and management biologist for the Division of Sportfish in 1981. He held the positions of regional management and research coordinator and assistant director for 28 years in the Division of Sportfish. During his tenure at the Division of Sportfish, Vincent Lang worked on a number of high-level research and policy issues for the state. He evaluated habitat needs and in-stream flow requirements of fish while working on the feasibility assessment of the Sistina River Hydroelectric Project. He was instrumental in integrating planning into the management of Alaska's recreational fisheries by leading an effort to develop and implement the first ever strategic plan for the Division of Sportfish. In 2012, he was named director of the Division of Wildlife, where he managed Alaska's wildlife under the sustained yield principles and public trust doctrine principles. He led legislative wildlife issues on the state, national, and international levels. In addition to his experience in both fisheries and wildlife management, Doug has served as the Endangered Species Act coordinator for the state of Alaska. He has represented the state of Alaska on a wide range of policy issues, including climate change, Arctic, and marine policy issues. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Biology Population Dynamics from the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, and a Master's in Science degree in Biological Oceanography from the University of Alaska, Fairbanks. Vincent Lang lives in Anchorage with his wife of 35 years. He has 3 children and is teaching his granddaughter to fish, hunt, and enjoy Alaska's outdoors. Please join me in welcoming Commissioner Doug Vincent Lang. Oh, it looks like we've got you on mute there.
Okay, there we go.
There we go.
Thank you for that kind introduction. I'm not sure who's all online, but hello, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to talk with you today a little bit about fisheries across the state of Alaska. As John said, early in this pandemic, the state fundamentally decided that we would have fisheries this year. We worked with staff to ensure that we had all of the necessary research and management infrastructure in place to safely conduct our fisheries across the state. And with few exceptions, we had most of the necessary programs in place to conduct our fisheries. You know, as you're traveling throughout the state, take time to thank staff for their efforts to get that infrastructure in place. It really was a Herculean effort to get it out there in a manner that not only allowed everybody to go out fishing, but allowed for their safety and community safety as we prosecuted those infrastructure, research and management infrastructure throughout Alaska. We also, as John said, work pretty closely with the fishing and processing industry and our coastal communities to ensure that safeguards were in place that really allowed our fisheries to operate safely in our communities. Well, we had a couple instances of COVID outbreaks. Large and all, we were able to conduct our fisheries with public safety considerations in place. Well, this added cost, it really allowed our fisheries to prosecute throughout the state. And for example, we worked with the fishing industry to allow waiving of rules regarding owner on board provisions for the halibut fishery. I want to take time right now to thank all of our fishermen and all of our processors and specifically our coastal communities for their willingness to allow these fisheries to operate this year. You know, your efforts really lessened the impact of the pandemic on our state and its economy, and to a large extent, the economies of many of our coastal communities throughout Alaska. So thank you for everything you've done to allow these fisheries to go on. Unfortunately, in terms of fisheries, many of our fisheries were below projections this year. This was related to a variety of factors, including lower abundance, COVID, and lower cost, all of which affected participation to some degree throughout many of our fisheries. 2020 Alaska salmon season represents the third consecutive even-numbered year of relatively weak landings compared to historical averages. Measured by numbers of fish, this year's harvest will rank 17th out of 23 even-numbered years since 1975. This may improve slightly as data are revised and the final landings of the seasons occur over the next few weeks. At a statewide level, the 2020 sockeye harvest of 45 million fish is 15% below the 5-year average, on par with the 10-year average, and nearly 10% above the 20-year average. Really, it was carried mostly by the Bristol Bay fishery, which balanced weak production across many of the other areas of the state. Nearly 58 million pink salmon were harvested this last summer, and this lags below the 10-year average for even-numbered years by about 25%. While the current season is below long-term averages, the 2016 and 2018 harvests were exceeded by about 50%. The 2020 harvest of about 7.5 million chum is the weakest harvest since 1979 in all regions of the states, experiencing disappointing landings. The impact in the Southeast and the AYK region is particularly challenging due to the relative importance of the species in regional fisheries and more specifically in terms of subsistence. Although some added volume is expected in the next 3 weeks, coho production will have declined to levels last seen in the 1970s. Finally, Chinook harvest for 2020 will end below historical harvest. So all in all, we were able to prosecute our salmon fisheries, but we had lower than expected or projected returns across the state. And we're not sure of the reasons yet completely, but we're starting to explore them. But again, Bristol Bay really carried the state in terms of salmon numbers. And the production that we've seen over the last several years has held steady and is increasing. Groundfish pollock harvests are about down 7% compared to 2019, despite higher tax. 77% of the Bering Sea Aleutian Island pollock tack was harvested by the end of August, compared to 84% in 2019 and 91% in 2018. Slower fishing pushes the bee season further into the fall than usual, increasing costs in an already difficult year due to COVID and other factors. For instance, we're also seeing issues with herring bycatch in that area. Harvest of Pacific cod and most other species is also down, and overall groundfish volumes are 7% below this point in 2019. While the Gulf of Alaska federal peacock fishery was closed, the state did take steps to open up the state water fishery this spring, which again provided some harvest opportunity early in the season when coastal fishermen were suffering and coastal communities were just struggling with the pandemic. Even with the lower harvest numbers, pollock mince production is up 21% over 2019. And so overall groundfish harvests are holding up, but again, we had COVID related experiences that somewhat and price related experiences that are somewhat driving the groundfish fisheries. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about CARES Act fishery relief, because that's a question that I'm getting increasing calls on. Congress appropriated $300 million of fishery relief nationwide to fishermen and processors across the nation. We had expected early on that we would receive a vast majority of that $300 million in the state of Alaska. Instead, NOAA early in this process made a decision to cap how much an individual state could get, and we were capped at $50 million. We were also told early in the process that we would have to use that $50 million to provide relief to 5 different sectors in the fishing industry. One is the processing sector, one is the commercial fishing sector, one is the sport guided industry, the fourth one is the mariculture industry, and then finally, unique to Alaska, we had a subsistence industry. So we've been taking some time in this process to gather information from people in each one of those sectors and developing a spend plan. I know a lot of fishermen would like us to get a spend plan done and money distributed, but I got to tell people there's a lot of fisheries that are still ongoing across the state of Alaska, and the economic impact has to be factored on an annual basis, not just for a certain period of time. So we've taken a slower approach to not pull fishermen out of the water to get into an application process when they're still fishing and trying to make a living. So the process we're in right now is we are going to very shortly put out a draft spend plan for public review. At that point in time, we'll open it up for 2 to 3 weeks, and then we'll take that back in. We'll look at what we get back in, and sometime in early October, we plan to submit that to the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission, who NOAA has designated as the body to administer and distribute the spend plan. They'll submit that spend plan to NOAA for their approval, and then once that approval is granted, they'll actually administer the distribution, administer the application process and the distribution of those funds. So it's our hope to have that to them sometime in October, and I'm guessing sometime in November you'll see the actual application process open. Again, I know a lot of people would like to get this application process sped up, but you've got to remember Alaska still has fisheries going on, and we certainly don't want to disenfranchise people that are still out fishing that potentially eligible for funding at the expense of people that have completed their fishing. The second thing I want to talk about, John touched a little bit, is fishery disasters. The pink salmon disaster program is in the appeal process and is closing down. I understand many had issues with this spend plan, and I want you to know we inherited it, and it was late in the process to significantly change it. We've examined the rollout and implementation of this plan in terms of a lessons learned exercise, and we're applying what we've learned into future disaster plans. And that includes both the 2018 Alaska Pequod and Chicknick spend plans that we've now put out for public review. Once we incorporate those public comments into our draft plans, we're going to have a short second public review opportunity, after which we'll again submit those spend plans to Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission for submission to NOAA for their approval and relief distribution. We anticipate sending those plans to the Pacific States in late October. And then they'll submit those again based on our behalf to NOAA for approval, and once granted, we'll administer those spend plans. You know, we received a wide variety of disaster requests associated with this year's fisheries, as John said, and we'll begin that process as soon as we can. I do want to say that the process for federal fisheries disaster is a bit cumbersome and lengthy, which can be further lengthened by allowing public comment on the draft spend plans. But in my opinion, that is both desirable and necessary to have a public review process. So we're working with Congress to streamline the process, and we're also adding a staff member to oversee the spend plan development. I also want to state that the department will be proposing using some of the disaster funds to explore the root cause of disasters towards a better understanding of how to prevent future disasters. And then finally, I wanted to tell everybody the Board of Fish met yesterday to talk about their meeting cycle for this upcoming year. They've decided to hold their work session in October virtually, and they've decided to postpone until the March-April timeframe both the Cordova and Ketchikan board meetings. We had to make a decision at this point in time whether we could conduct those meetings safely, both in Cordova and Ketchikan. I understand both those communities would love to have those meetings. It adds money to the economy. It also adds an opportunity to have those meetings in the communities in which the fisheries are operated. But in our estimation, and I think the board agreed, that we just couldn't safely bring in, 60 to 70 people into those communities under the current COVID conditions. So rather than make a decision on postponing them for a year, we've simply postponed that decision and hoping that we can hold those meetings in the potentially March, April, May timeframe moving forward. So with that, I want to again thank everybody across Alaska for their efforts this year in having fisheries prosecuted. Again, the contribution to the state economy during a time when oil was weak and tourism is down is substantial, and especially to many of our coastal communities that rely on raw fish taxes. So thanks everybody for your willingness to work with us to get those fisheries in the water. Thank you.
So Sarah, this is John Mueller. If I could just add a couple of things.
Yes, please.
It's important to also note that, the Dunlap administration and our commissioners have been working closely with our congressional delegation, Senator Sullivan, Congressman Young, and we've been, with respect to many of these issues, relief for fishermen, and that reminds me that although it's not a state program. I don't know if you have other speakers that may be speaking to this or not, but in terms of relief to fishermen, there's a tariff bill that passed, of which an application to USDA that is available for fishermen as well. And I don't want to speak much more to that, other than the fact that I just want to make mention of it. Many of you online probably already familiar with it. If not, there's opportunity for relief on our respective fisheries from USDA. So I just want to make those two comments.
Sure. Thank you for that addition. We have had a question come in from Alaska Salmon Habitat Information Program. They ask, changing water conditions from climate change are threatening the sustainability of Alaska fisheries. The NPFMC shut down cod fishing specifically due to climate change. How do you propose mitigating climate impacts to our fisheries going forward?
Well, the state of Alaska is evaluating marine ocean survival conditions in terms of how they're impacting both salmon and groundfish fisheries. A lot is unknown about what's happening in terms of survival and factors influencing survival of both salmon and marine species in the marine environment. So we've dedicated a fisheries scientist in our commercial fisheries division to start that evaluation process. We're also working with federal agencies to put together some kind of a research proposal that would help us better understanding the deep blue ocean. It's a lot harder to study survival and conditions out in the ocean, but I think we've come to the conclusion that we have to do it. And we have to have a better understanding. So we're evaluating it. We're getting involved in ocean policy, and we're getting involved in working with our partners to evaluate what's happening in the ocean. So.
Mr. Mueller, anything to add?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you. So I haven't seen any additional questions pop through just yet. Again, we have that about 30 second to 1 minute lag time. So I'd like to just again say to everyone watching live right now, please feel free, if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, go ahead and just add a comment to the video. The chamber team is actively monitoring those comment sections and sending those on to me so that we can send those to our presenters. If you happen to be watching on our website that does not have a comments section, but you can call us at 907-486-5557. And we can go ahead and relay those questions to the presenters. If you happen to be watching at a later date, not watching this live, you can still send those questions to us and we will forward those to our presenters. That's not just this presentation, that's all day long. Make sure that you send any questions to our office. And while we wait, because again, I've mentioned that lag time, I have really actually just a fun, lighthearted question for both of you, which is, we're all about Alaska fish here. So please tell me, what's your favorite fish to eat and how do you like it prepared?
Anything I catch.
That's a tough question. I got a preference for black cod, smoked black cod just about any way.
Very good. Mr. Vincent Lang, I don't think you're going to get off with just whatever I catch. You got to give us.
I like fresh rockfish. I think fresh rockfish caught the same day, you can't beat it.
Absolutely.
You got to give him a break. He doesn't catch much fish.
I suppose too busy just working for us, all right? All right, let me reach out for just a final reach out.
Again, while we're waiting for comments, I can't express the gratitude that I have, and I think the governor has, and governor's office has, for fishermen across the state and to work in the communities across Alaska to allow our fisheries to go on. It was really an effort, and I'm really so proud of our staff, and I'm just so thankful to the fishermen in the communities to allow our fisheries to go.
Thank you so much. Well, go ahead.
Maybe one last comment for me, if you've got the time here,
Yeah,
relative to the Alaska CARES Act. You know, commercial fishermen originally were not for the 290 some million for small Alaskan businesses on the Alaska CARES side. Commercial fishermen were not originally qualified. We modified that kind of later in the process to where fishermen were qualified as, even though they didn't have an Alaska business license, their permit cards were qualification as a small business. And then we had the little issue with other funding like PPP and the loan program through the feds directly that came through before the Alaska CARES Act ever was there. So we ended up addressing that. And by the time we got it open up for fishermen, the program was oversubscribed, meaning that more applications came in and more requests came in than there was money available. I will just add at this point, you see there's some funding that's been allocated that has not been applied for. There's community funds out there that haven't been applied for. Some applicants are not won't be 100% funded based on their request. So it still remains to be seen that what might come of that. Obviously, there's a lot of people in line for any reserves that are left after these application processes. But nonetheless, I just wanted to make that point that there's going to be a discussion that the governor's office will be having here relatively soon.
Well, I want to thank both of you for your very frank discussion and dialogue with all of us here today. We know your time is very valuable, and we appreciate that you've taken some time to give us those updates and share that with you. So with that, we'll go ahead and be wrapping up this morning's sessions. You can both feel free to log off. And I have a few additional things here to share.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a few additional things to share here with our ComFish community. We will have afternoon sessions today. We will be hearing from, let me pull up my schedule here. We will be getting the state update from Representative Louise Stutz and Senator Gary Stevens today from 2 to 2:45. From 2:45 to 3:15, we will be listening to a pre-recorded session by Ted Teskey, a comprehensive look at non-fatal injuries and illnesses among Alaska fishermen. And then from 3:15 to 4, we are going to hear about boat batteries, the backbone of your electrical system, the do's and the don'ts, and that's by Adam Smoot with Breakwater Marine Electric. Again, we've got all sorts of great things planned for you this afternoon. Please feel free to tune in if you're not able to tune in live. All of our sessions are being recorded and they will be available at a later date, probably early next week. I know some of the sessions are being uploaded today, but early next week, we should have all the sessions uploaded at comfishak.com. Again, as a reminder, we appreciate here at the Chamber any support that we can get financially. And so we encourage you, please, to go ahead and buy these cool ComFish Alaska shirts. We've got fleeces, we've got these long sleeve t-shirts, we have pins, stickers, and some really fun, cute, extra tough socks with little crabs on them. So please check out our website at comfishak.com. You'll see a shop tab at the top and you can go ahead and click on that. Make your order. We ship absolutely anywhere, or if you're local here in Kodiak, you can schedule a pickup with us. And so again, we want to thank you for joining us today. We will have afternoon sessions and we should have a fairly big announcement coming up later this afternoon. We're waiting to confirm details, but stay tuned for a big announcement. In the meantime, I'd like to go ahead and just share a quick PowerPoint presentation with all of you. This is actually just a whole bunch of fun photos that have been submitted to us over the years, just showing off the commercial fishermen right here in Kodiak and throughout the state of Alaska. So bear with me while I pull that up. And please just enjoy. I'd like to again say thank you to all of our presenters from yesterday and this morning. Again, we have a couple more sessions to listen to this afternoon, so please feel free to tune in and stay tuned for that big announcement that we're going to have. And we will see all of you back here today at